This is the story of a single weekend in August 1971, when 15 men met in secret and made a decision that no Congress voted on, no public debated, and no foreign government received any warning about. A decision that permanently changed the value of every dollar in your wallet. On Sunday, August 15th of that year, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television, interrupted a popular Western called Bonanza, and told Americans he was protecting their money. The Dow surged the next morning. The New York Times applauded. Nixon called it the dawn of a new prosperity without war. Within a decade, inflation had climbed to nearly 15%. The dollar had shed a third of its value. Interest rates hit 20%, and a recession pushed unemployment to levels unseen since the Great Depression. What happened in that secret meeting, why Nixon did it, and why Americans are still paying for it today, that's what this video is about. To understand what Nixon broke, you first need to understand what he was breaking. July 1944, and World War II was still being fought when representatives from 44 nations gathered in a small resort town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, arriving with a shared conviction that the financial chaos between the wars had helped cause the conflict itself. What they built was straightforward in design. The US dollar would serve as the world's reserve currency. Every other nation would peg its money to the dollar, and the dollar itself would be anchored to gold at a fixed price of $35 per ounce. Any foreign government holding dollars could walk up to the US Treasury window and exchange them for gold at that rate, no exceptions. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were born from that same meeting to keep the whole system regulated. For a while, the arrangement worked spectacularly well. America emerged from the war holding the world's largest gold reserves and the only major industrial economy that hadn't been leveled by bombs, and Washington extended roughly $13.3 billion in Marshall Plan aid to a shattered Europe, rebuilding industries, preventing famine, and stabilizing currencies across the continent. Every nation needed dollars to trade, and American gold backed every one of them. The system became fully operational by 1958, and for most of the following decade, it delivered exactly the stability its architects had promised. But a structural flaw had been baked into the foundation from day one, and the longer the system ran, the more clearly that flaw showed itself. Here's the contradiction nobody wanted to say out loud. The world needed dollars to function, but the dollar only stayed credible if America had enough gold to back them all up, and those two requirements were pulling in opposite directions. Foreign aid, military operations, and overseas investment pushed dollars out into the world at a steady pace throughout the 1960s, and every one of those dollars carried the same theoretical guarantee: $35 gets you 1 ounce of gold. By 1966, non-U.S. central banks held $14 billion in American currency, while total U.S. gold reserves sat at only $13.2 billion, and just $3.2 billion of that was actually available to cover foreign holdings. The math had stopped working. By the late 1960s, the situation had grown even more unbalanced, with 4 times as many dollars circulating internationally as there was gold in the American stockpile to support them. None of this happened by accident. President Lyndon Johnson escalated the Vietnam War at massive cost while simultaneously launching the Great Society, a sweeping set of domestic programs that included Medicare, Medicaid, and major federal education and housing spending, and he did all of it without a matching tax increase. Inflation, sitting at just 1% in 1965, began climbing steadily. As American prices rose and the dollar became overvalued against foreign currencies, other nations started eyeing their dollar reserves and calculating whether now was the time to trade them in for gold. The response came in November 1961, when 8 central banks from Great Britain, West Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, France, and the United States formed what became known as the London Gold Pool, pooling their reserves to sell gold into the market whenever the price threatened to rise above $35 an ounce. They were, in effect, using real metal to defend a fictional price. For several years, they managed it. Then, in March 1968, redemption demand spiked beyond anything the pool could absorb, and it collapsed. The $35 price could no longer be held, and the clock on the whole system started running down fast. By 1971, the system wasn't struggling anymore, it was bleeding out, and everyone with access to a balance sheet could see it. West Germany made the first move in May of that year, walking away from Bretton Woods entirely and refusing to sell any more Deutsche Marks for US dollars. And within 3 months the dollar dropped 7.5% against the Deutsche Mark as other nations began demanding gold for their holdings. Switzerland followed on August 9th. 2 days later, on August 11th, Britain requested that $3 billion in gold be moved from Fort Knox to the Federal Reserve in New York. France didn't just request its gold back. French President Georges Pompidou dispatched a naval vessel to physically retrieve his country's deposits from American shores, and the image of a French warship arriving in New York Harbor to load up American gold tells you exactly how much confidence remained in the system. By August 15th, U.S. gold reserves had fallen to only 10,000 metric tons, less than half their peak amount, while monthly unemployment sat at 6.1% and annual inflation ran at 5.84%. Nixon had run completely out of road. From August 13th through the 15th, 1971, 15 of the country's most powerful economic officials gathered at the presidential retreat at Camp David, and not a word of it leaked to the public, to foreign governments, or to most of Congress. Treasury Secretary John Connally served as Nixon's primary advisor on the decision, with Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns and Budget Director George Shultz also in the room, alongside Undersecretary for International Monetary Affairs Paul Volcker, a man who had spent years working on the Bretton Woods system and would spend years more cleaning up its aftermath. What they produced over that weekend came down to 3 moves. Close the gold window permanently, ending the foundational promise of Bretton Woods. Impose a 90-day freeze on all wages and prices across the American economy, and slap a 10% surcharge on all taxable imports to push back against the growing trade deficit. Sunday evening, August 15th, Nixon delivered the announcement on television, framing the gold window closure as a defense against what he called the attacks of international money speculators, and calling the whole package the foundation of a new prosperity without war. The Dow Jones recorded its largest single-day point gain in history the next morning, and the New York Times editorial board said it unhesitatingly applauded the boldness of the move. Nixon won re-election the following year by a historic margin. Treasury Secretary Connally, addressing foreign finance ministers who wanted to know what this all meant for their currencies, delivered his answer in 10 words. "The dollar may be our currency, but it is your problem." The immediate aftermath was messy in the way that only monetary collapses can be. Slow enough to seem manageable, fast enough to be undeniable. In December 1971, the group of 10 industrialized nations attempted to reassemble something workable with the Smithsonian Agreement, a new set of fixed exchange rates built around a devalued dollar, which Nixon described without apparent irony as the most significant monetary agreement in the history of the world. The price of gold, held artificially at $35 per ounce for so long, began rising immediately, to around $60 an ounce by mid-1972 and $90 by early 1973. On February 12th of that year, the United States devalued the dollar by an additional 10%, and when markets reopened, speculation against the dollar erupted. By March 1973, the major industrialized nations had formally abandoned fixed exchange rates altogether, and the Bretton Woods era closed for good, replaced by floating currencies whose values would now be set by markets, speculation, and central bank decisions, not gold. Under the new system, the dollar lost a third of its value in the 1970s alone. And that's when, in October 1973, the situation got dramatically worse. 6 OPEC members, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Libya, and Algeria, declared an oil embargo on the United States in response to American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War, and oil prices quadrupled, jumping from roughly $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel almost overnight. Gas lines stretched around city blocks, heating bills exploded, and the cost of transporting or manufacturing anything climbed with them. America was now living through something economists had long considered impossible: soaring inflation and rising unemployment running in parallel. The name they gave it was stagflation, and there was no clean economic playbook for getting out of it. Gold was gone as the dollar's foundation, and something had to replace it, which meant Washington needed to get creative fast. Through a series of meetings involving the Nixon administration, Henry Kissinger, and the Saudi royal family, an arrangement took shape that would define the next half-century of global finance. America would provide military protection for Saudi Arabia's oil fields, and Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. By 1975, every OPEC nation had agreed to the same terms, pricing their oil in dollars and holding their proceeds in US government debt securities. The effect was immediate and sweeping because every nation on Earth that wanted to buy oil, which was every nation on Earth, now needed American dollars to do it. Oil had replaced gold as the dollar's anchor, and today roughly 80% of global oil transactions still run through US dollars, a direct legacy of those conversations in the mid-1970s. The petrodollar arrangement bought American monetary dominance another 50 years. What it could not do was fix the inflation crisis already burning at home. Between 1965 and 1982, the United States burned through what economists now call the Great Inflation, and the numbers from that period are worth sitting with. Starting from just 1% in 1965, the inflation rate climbed all the way to 14% by 1980, and across the decade of the 1970s, prices accumulated slightly over 100% in total inflation, the second worst 10-year stretch in recorded American history, surpassed only by the World War I era. Unemployment drifted upward from a low of 3.5% in 1969, reaching 9.7% by 1982. Real wages stagnated throughout, with the cost of housing, food, energy, and cars climbing faster than most paychecks, and the middle class that had expanded steadily through the post-war Bretton Woods years began to feel the squeeze from both directions at once. Something had to break the cycle, and the medicine, when it finally arrived, nearly killed the patient. Paul Volcker had been in the room at Camp David in August 1971, working as Undersecretary for International Monetary Affairs, one of the architects of the decision to close the gold window, and in 1979 President Jimmy Carter handed him the job of fixing what that weekend had helped set in motion, appointing him chairman of the Federal Reserve. Volcker's diagnosis was unsparing. The only path out of inflation required making money expensive, very expensive, and he was prepared to hold that position regardless of the political cost. The federal funds rate, averaging 11.2% in 1979, climbed under his direction to a peak of 20% in June 1981, and the prime rate, what banks charged their best customers, reached 21.5%. A mortgage in 1981 might carry an interest rate north of 20%, which meant small businesses couldn't afford loans, farmers couldn't afford equipment, and the housing market essentially froze. Inflation peaked at 14.8% in March 1980, and then Volcker's approach started working. By 1983, inflation had dropped below 3%. The cost was a recession severe enough that, before 2008, economists considered it the worst American downturn since the Great Depression, with unemployment cresting near 11%, the highest level in the entire post-World War II era. Actual wanted posters with Volcker's face circulated around the country. Construction workers mailed 2x4s to the Federal Reserve Building, and farmers sent bushels of corn in protest, with critics accusing him of destroying small businesses and gutting the American dream. None of it changed his course. The inflation crisis that had started in the late 1960s was, by 1983, finally over, and Volcker is now regarded as one of the most consequential Fed chairmen in American history, the person who rebuilt the dollar's credibility from the wreckage. Some wounds, though, don't fully heal. Here is what 50 years of life without a gold anchor has done to your money. Gold, legally fixed at $35 per ounce in 1971, hit $850 by 1980, 9 years after Nixon closed the window, and by 2025 it crossed $4,300 per ounce, a greater than 12,000% increase from the 1971 fixed price, and the single clearest number showing what happened to the dollar's purchasing power over that span. Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI data puts a $1971 equivalent today at roughly $8, meaning the dollar has shed more than 87% of its purchasing power since that Sunday night broadcast, losing value at an average rate of 3.86% per year. Compare that to the era the gold standard governed. Between 1880 and 1914, the average annual inflation rate held at just 0.1%. Not 1%, not 2%, but 0.1% per year. Whatever its limitations, the gold standard delivered a kind of long-term price stability that the floating rate era has never come close to matching. One of the most telling patterns in the post-1971 economy is the gap that opened between productivity and wages. Before 1971, when American workers produced more, their pay rose in rough step with it. After 1971, productivity kept climbing steadily while wages began to stagnate, with the gains flowing elsewhere. And nowhere is that squeeze more tangible for ordinary Americans than in housing. Median home prices have risen more than 1,600% since 1971, while median household income grew only 475%. This story carries two serious sides, and the people arguing each of them aren't wrong to do so. Defenders of Nixon's decision point out that closing the gold window was probably inevitable. given that the US simply didn't have enough gold left to honor the dollar's global obligations, and that the system would have unraveled regardless of what Nixon chose to do on that August weekend. Floating exchange rates, they argue, gave policymakers the room to respond to crises that a gold constraint would have prevented, including the 2008 financial collapse, where the Fed's ability to act aggressively likely prevented something much worse. Critics, including Paul Volcker himself in his later years, looked at what the floating rate era had produced and found it wanting. In 2011, Volcker put it plainly, "Nobody's in charge. The Europeans couldn't live with the uncertainty and made their own currency, and now that's in trouble." The man who attended the Camp David meeting and later spent years repairing its inflationary damage was not satisfied with the replacement system, and his skepticism carries weight precisely because of what he lived through. The gold standard came with its own real costs: higher unemployment in downturns, less flexibility in crises, constraints that often hurt working people most. But the monetary system that replaced it brought persistent inflation, currency speculation, and a decades-long erosion of purchasing power that has quietly widened the distance between those who hold assets and those who depend on wages. On a Sunday night in August 1971, 15 men in a mountain retreat ended a monetary system that had delivered global stability for nearly 3 decades, doing so without a public vote, without congressional sign-off, and without warning a single allied government. Within 2 years, the fixed exchange rate system they substituted had also collapsed. Within a decade, inflation had consumed a full 100% of consumer prices, interest rates had hit 20%, and the worst recession since the Great Depression had arrived. Gold, which the world's most powerful economy once fixed at $35 an ounce, now trades above $4,300. The dollar you earn today carries roughly 12 cents of the purchasing power a $1,971 held. Right now, nations including China, India, Russia, and Saudi Arabia are actively exploring alternatives to dollar-denominated trade. A geopolitical story with a direct line back to that Camp David weekend. Gold analysts at major institutions' project prices could push toward $5,000 per ounce in the coming years, and the rise of gold in 2025 marked its largest annual gain in 46 years, the biggest since the inflationary crisis of 1979. Whether the 1971 decision was necessary, reckless, or somewhere between those two verdicts, the consequences of that weekend are still arriving, still showing up in grocery bills, mortgage payments, and retirement accounts. The men in that room could not have known exactly what they were unleashing, but the record of the 50 years since is now long enough to read clearly, and it is not a record of a problem that ever fully went away.